Hello and welcome back to this Action Objects Object-Driven Behavior in Unreal Engine 4. I'm Thomas M, and we're going to go ahead and get started on creating our action objects. If you didn't watch the introductory video, I gave a brief overview about what action objects are and a little bit about how they're used and when you're going to see them and when you're going to use them, stuff like that. So if you haven't seen that video, go ahead and stop by, just give it a quick look. It's only 5 minutes long. So now we're going to go ahead and get in and start making our action object. We're going to start by creating a new project. I'm using Unreal Engine 4.26.0. As far as I know, this should work on just about every version of Unreal from forever ago until the end of time. I don't really foresee any of this stuff being changed anytime soon, so I highly doubt I will need to update this video. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and make a side scroller, not a 2D side scroller, but just a regular side scroller. Just to get something easy, we're again going to use a blueprint class, and I'm going to call this AO. And yeah, my CTR is fine. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is open up our blueprints folder, and we're going to create a blueprint class that derives from hit all classes object. This is called an action object. So this is going to serve as our base class for all action objects. Any object that commits or completes an action is going to derive from this class or inherit from this. Next, we're going to add 4 functions to this class. First, on GiveAction, can activate action, activate action, and end action. So this is the core of what an action really does. So it's given, as in it's created on the player, and this sort of works as our begin play of sorts, or our constructor. Because we don't really have a constructor being an object, at least not for blueprints. In C++ classes, of course, you can override the actual constructor, and you maybe don't need on GiveAction, but that's entirely up to you. So these functions are going to hold our checking functionality for activation. So when we give the action, we fire this, and then we need to have a generic way for, are we going to be able to activate our action? Like, if we have multiple melee attacks, maybe we don't want to start one if another one is running, so we'll maybe put a tag on the player that says I'm running an animation right now. And when I say tag, I don't mean a string tag. We'll get to the Etag system in a little bit, whereas it's just an enumeration, but we're going to be able to check data, check information for whether we're going to be able to activate our action before we actually commit to activating and running the execution of whatever meat and potatoes this action object actually does. So one more thing in here, can activate action needs to have an output variable of a boolean, which is can activate. And the last thing we need in this action object is a variable. We need a reference to our owner actor. Since we're not an actor, we don't actually have an owner. Like normally in your actor classes, like if we open up the character, we can get our owner. We have get owner, set owner, but as you can see, this is part of the actor class. So if you've never worked with objects before, this might be a little bit weird. We don't have an owner or an instigator or any of that fun stuff. When we're working in objects, we just have to manually do what we do. So we're going to create a variable called owner actor, and that's of the type actor, and we're going to make this one instance editable and expose on spawn, so that when we create this class, we'll be able to set owner actor, and you'll see that in just a second. So the next thing we need is we need to go to our side scroller character, and we need to add an array of action objects. Call these starting actions. And these are class references, not actual object references. because again, these aren't actors, these aren't components, but they're closer to components, I suppose. But these aren't really components. They're not actually going to exist in the hierarchy over here. We can't like add them here or anything. So we actually need to create them on our character. And we're going to go ahead and do these on begin play. I'm going to grab these classes. I'm going to go through this array, and we're just going to create them with a construct object from class. That's the function. And now we have this owner-actor reference here. And we're going to go ahead and punch in our character to that, and we're going to make the character the outer as well. Outer is the object that owns this object, this action object, which you might say, oh, this is kind of like the owner. And it sort of is, except it doesn't have to be an actor. So having an owner actor just means that we've at least casted to an actor. Because being on an object, there's not really much we can do with that without casting it to something else. So I just go ahead and do an owner actor variable. You'll notice that the gameplay ability system does an actor info structure. And they use a whole interface to be able to grab that information from who is my owner and then cast it to an actor. So they do a very similar thing. So we're going to construct our action objects, and then we're going to call on GiveAction. That way these actions all call their initialization. I'm going to go ahead and comment this. Okay. And then while we're in here, we'll go ahead and do our input events. We need project settings, input, fire primary weapon, and that's going to be our left mouse. And we'll go ahead and do a secondary as well. Be on the right mouse. We'll go back into our side scroller character, and we will get that fire primary weapon, fire secondary weapon. And then for these, we're going to use event dispatchers. So I'm doing these in dispatchers so that this continues to be a dynamic pattern. You can obviously add your action component, and then you could actually save a reference to it. Like I could put a specific single class over here that is my primary fire ability, and then I could put that class specifically in my input action here. I could just call activate on that action. The reason I'm using dispatchers is because this is a little closer to what you'll typically see in the gas patterns. So wanting to be kind of similar for that tutorial series. Next, we're going to need a function that tells our character to bind an event to our primary input action. So in order to do this, we need to, in our action object, we can either get a reference to our character, like say grab our owner actor, and then I could cast it to a side scroller character, and then I could bind an event to on fire primary, right? But rather than doing that, I'm going to use an interface to communicate between the two of them so that I don't have to cast this owner actor. I don't want to have to make this anything but an actor, because I don't want to have to know that it's a character, or else I would just save it as a character right away. But by knowing that it's just that it will work on every actor, we don't have to worry about all of a sudden putting this ability on a different actor or on a different pawn, like an enemy or something like that. Like if I wanted to give the same melee attack ability to an enemy, just by swapping out the montage, you can use the same attack to or the same logic to build entirely different skeletons, entirely different attacks that work very differently. So in our action object, we're going to bind to player input when we need to, yeah. So we're going to do this by creating an interface. iAction object input delegate. And we're just going to create a function that is bind action to primary input. And we're going to take the action object in. And then we're going to put this interface on the character. Implement this event. Fire primary. And we'll select the function. It kind of sucks that you can't pass in event delegates as parameters in blueprints. It's something that I'm kind of used to doing in C++, but it's not something you can do in blueprints apparently. What I had planned on doing was just passing in the event delegate directly in here. It just kind of threw me off that you can't make an event delegate an input parameter on an event. And I thought that was quite interesting. Because you can do that in C++, so it's a little weird why you can't do it in blueprints. I've seen some answers that seem to cover it on the answer forums, but it's a little strange. It's unexpected. So now we have our activate action bound to fire primary based on this interface call event bind action to primary input. So in our action object, when our character creates this object and puts it on itself, calls the onGiveAction script, we then want to call that interface bind action to primary input. And we'll just pass in a reference to ourselves. And actually, I did that a little bit wrong, sorry. We don't actually want to bind activate action, we want to bind can activate action. So for now we're going to bind activate action. Some of you may be thinking that like, wait, what about this can activate action? So since this is our actual check, we're going to create another function down the road or actually I'll just go ahead and do it now. So we're going to make another function that is try activate action. So this is something we can bind to our input delegate because it doesn't return any parameters. So we can bind try activate action, and then this can call can activate action, and then this gives us our actual check to say, hey, can we go ahead and do the activation as we want? And then if we can, we go ahead and call activate action, which is our actual activation. That makes sense. We are trying to activate what calls can activate to determine if it can or not based on whatever parameters it is we're going to put in there. Like when we do melee attacks, we'll do some checks to make sure the player's in the right state where they can start doing a melee attack. Lots of things will be done in can activate action. So we're going to bind try activate action. And we're going to do this. We're also going to do an additional check in here. We're just going to add a Boolean variable. It says B is input bound. So for now we only have primary, so we're just going to leave it this way. We'll do a secondary in a little bit, but I'm actually not going to do an object for that. It's for testing. Save. So is input bound, by default we'll say is true. So this just says, the idea here is that we're going to make child classes of this action object. So each child class will have an is input bound variable that they can set. that we'll be able to set in their default settings, and we'll be able to create actions that aren't actually bound to input. Like if you say want to have an action that is a reaction, like a hit reaction, something like that, you can continue to use the action object pattern. And then just to check that this stuff is actually working, we're going to go and activate action, and we're going to have it print hello. And we'll get our world context object as our owner. So this is, if you haven't worked with objects before, print string is something that requires an object that exists in the scene in order to know what the camera is. So you need to have a world context, something instantiated in your scene. Since an action object isn't always instantiated, we go ahead and just use the owner actor to call print string on. And it doesn't appear to be working. So let's see. That would be because we don't have any starting actions. Sorry. So I'm going to put this default action object. In the future, you'll never actually instantiate this class, but that's okay. We can do it for now. Okay. Let's see here. And calling on GiveAction. We are input bound. Binding our action to primary input. Let's see. So, first thing I'm going to do is look at this drop down and see that yes, my action object does actually exist. And I'm going to look here, I click and see if it's trying to run. It doesn't look like it is. Okay, can activate. Oh, looks like can activate is not returning anything. So all I'm doing here is just watching that execution pen, and I can see that, look, it's only getting to that branch and it's never coming up true. So, oh, look at that. By default, it's returning false. So, now we can see hello every time we click. And our character has no idea what our action object is. So, let me go ahead and delete that. Next, from this, we're going to go ahead and create a simple melee attack. It's really the easiest way to sort of see these things happen. So we're just going to right-click our action object. We're going to create a child blueprint class. We're going to call this melee base. This will be a base class for all melee abilities. We'll go ahead and open this up. And then we can go ahead and override activate action. So event activate action, you want to have it in your event graph just to have some more flexibility in the nodes that you use and what you do with them. We're going to be using some gates and things when we get into combos that don't work inside of functions. So we're going to use activate action here. And we're going to go ahead and call the parent function. And this is not particularly necessary right now because it doesn't have anything in it. But it's good practice to get into because, like I said, this is going to be a base class, and then we're going to build children classes off of this. So anytime you call a event, it's good practice to go ahead and call the parent function when you're using this pattern, as long as you're aware of what the parents are doing, and that you want to be using the parent's functionality as much as possible. So, like I mentioned earlier, a melee attack can mean many things, but in this sense, we're simply playing a montage and toggling our colliders on and off at the appropriate times. So let's start out from here. We need to make our animations able to play montages, and we need to get some melee attacks. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a pack of animations. I like this 41 animations for monsters pack by, I don't want to butcher pronouncing that, but this is a pretty good pack. You get some decent looking stuff. You get some decent looking animations. I think it's $6, so it's definitely good value for the money. They at least work. So and then we can see I've got some attack animations here. It gives me something to work with. You can use whatever animations you want. These are the same fundamental principles. I'm just going to very quickly use these animations for this guy. So I'll probably just speed montage through this while I set up all of these animations. I just retargeted the animation blueprint, replaced the animations in the blend space, and I'm going to go ahead and use the jump animations. There's a cool looking jump in here for this monster pack that's pretty nice, but you kind of have to split it up and make it play nice with this system. It's kind of a pain, but it is a pretty nice looking animation. It just takes a minute, so I'm just going to leave it for tutorialness. So it just looks a little bit different. I think that's fine. So we're going to go ahead and get our melee attack now. So the part I didn't include in here is there's one more change we needed to do in here that I need to actually talk about, and that is montage slots. So we're going to go ahead and save a cached pose here, and then we need to get our cached pose here, play a slot. I'm going to create a new slot. So slots are what you need for montages to work. You have to have a slot, right? In order to play a montage, you have to play a montage in a slot and have your animation be able to incorporate that montage, right? So this says if our slot is doing anything, if there's an animation running in our slot, it's going to override whatever's in this cached pose, right? It's just going to completely blow it away and just do montage stuff instead. Now the other thing we're going to do when we do ranged attacks is we're going to make another slot called outer body. And for that, we're going to do a blend slot. I'm going to call this upper body. And we're going to do a layered blend per bone. In this node, we can set that like, hey, we probably want to split the animations somewhere around spine 01. That's usually what I go with. Bone depth of 0 should be fine. Yeah, so this just kind of says we're going to blend the two of them at this bone. Say the base where my feet are and my hips and stuff is going to be based on the cached pose, and my upper body is just going to control everything spine 1 and up. We are going to go ahead and create an animation montage using our monster attack 1. Create an anim montage. I just use the default naming convention. It seems to work just fine. So the first thing we want to do is go to this default group, default slot, and we want to change that to our body slot. Now you'll notice that your skeleton stops moving and doing the animation, but like the timeline keeps going. And this can be kind of annoying when you're learning, because this looks broken, right? And like you click around and you try to do a billion things and nothing ever works. And sometimes if you close it and reopen it, it will work. But what I found to work more often than not is change this slot before you apply the preview mesh asset, or swap this to a different mesh if you can, clear it out and select it again, and just be able to hit this apply to asset. And then all of a sudden your animations start working again. I don't know why. I've had to completely reboot the engine, like restart the engine just to get the stupid montage to play, because it won't work in engine either if it's broken in here. Like if you start trying to use it in game, it will be broken, but it's not actually broken. It just needs to refresh and decide not to be stupid. So with this montage, we're gonna have a window, which looks like it starts right about there, where he's able to do damage. So I'm going to add a notify state, this montage notify window, and I'm going to put it to about May, when he's done doing his swipe stuff. Or I like to push them a little bit towards the extremes. You know, I like to be a little bit on the early side, and then a little bit on the late side, turning them off. Just to make sure that like we have a chance to really damage whoever's in front of us that we're trying to strike, right? Like we really have a chance to do what we want to do here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this slot name from default. I'm going to hit details. This section name, sorry, not slot, section. This montage section, I'm going to call it attack 1. Because we're going to make this out into a combo attack here in a little bit. But for now, we're just going to attack 1, and this will work just fine. So let's go back and do our melee base. And in our activate action, we are going to call this great function play montage. So play montage wants to take in a skeletal mesh component, a montage to play, which I've mentioned we're just going to promote to a variable, montage to play. I also really love this 4.26 update where they now call the variables whatever the input variable is that you pulled it off of. That's brand new. Like, you used to have to type in the same thing, montage to play, every time. It was, great update, like, wonderful feature. I don't know who thought of it, but they need a good pat on the back. Anyway, so we're going to set this, I think it's still selected, yes. So we're going to set this montage as the one that we want to play, and we're going to need our skeletal mesh component. So I'm going to get event on GiveAction. So rather than, see, what I could do is I could get my owner actor and I could cast it to side scroll character and whatever, and I could just negate like any performance advantage I'm getting here. But what I'd rather do is on GiveAction, like one time, the very first time when we get this ability, when we get this action, we're going to grab our owner actor and we're going to get component by class. So the reason that we're doing this in this weird, like kind of expensive way, like get component by class is a really expensive function call, but the reason we do it this way is that we know that we don't have to worry about if we decide to make a new character class, like we decide to make a new pawn, we don't have to worry about it. It's like if we don't want to inherit from character anymore, we want to make our own movement components and our own, like, I don't know, character does a whole lot of stuff like launching and all sorts of, it handles a lot of replication and stuff for you, for like mesh components, and like everything's sort of set up to be a player pawn. But if we decided like, oh, we don't want to use any of that crap, like we want to make our own stuff, then we can, and we never have to worry about breaking our actions, right? Our action objects. Or if we decide that like the player character hierarchy is going to be completely separate from our AI character hierarchy, like who cares? We're just getting a skeletal mesh. So that's why I recommend doing this. Under skeletal mesh. So I recommend doing this on GiveAction, do it once, get it over with, and definitely don't do it, or definitely don't do it like on activate action. Like I've seen people do stuff like that in patterns like this, and just be very careful that this is a super, super expensive call. I know it doesn't have an execution line, but it's super expensive to plug anything into it. So fire it once, and never worry about it again. Make sure it sits there. Like if we were doing a multiplayer game, we would do like a rep notify to make sure that um, our client and server were both matched and make sure that they always had this reference right away. And then we probably do like a validation check in our activate action, and there's more you can do to make this a little more robust, but for now this works. So we're going to get our owner skeletal mesh, and that's what we're going to play this montage on. And the reason I made the section name attack 1 is that we're going to create our sections based on an attack integer. So for now we're just going to call this attack 1. But we'll append the word attack to our index in the combo, which for now we'll just assume is 1. So we'll worry about the combos later. But for now, we've at least got this stuff in. This is something that it is designed to replicate. It's designed to handle just about everything that you need playing a montage to ever do. You can have right out of the box in play montage. Most anything you see that's a tutorial that says we're gonna change the way that we play montages overrides this and includes the existing functionality, because what's here does 99% of what you need. So this montage, remember we created that montage window. So we've got notify begin and notify end. That's our montage window. So on notify begin, we turn colliders on. On notify end, we're going to turn colliders off. So the first thing we want to do is worry about activation. So we're just going to on completed, I'm going to say end action. So there's the first thing we want to do. And then I'm going to grab this in the content browser so we can give it to our character. So we're going to have our melee based object. And now when we play our game, so now you can see he plays this attack montage when you click your mouse. Now, anybody who clicked really quickly probably found really right away that we have this problem. If you click in the middle of the attack, he doesn't know to not start playing that montage over again. So there are two ways to handle this problem. The first way is to create a boolean, like B is active, and toggle it in the base action class. So we would have it, turn on and activate action, and then when we end action, we'd have it turn off. And that's perfectly fine for a lot of things, but it's not necessarily the best option for dynamism. For being dynamic. It's better to create a system where you can have many things set rules independently of each other and check what they need from a ledger before choosing to commit to actions. So to create this rules ledger, we're going to make what I cleverly call the ETags system. You may notice that this system has a lot in common with the gameplay tag system, but again, this is a fraction of what the gas system has to offer. We're just looking at tags as enumerated values, no internal hierarchy of tags or any of that fancy editor stuff. The idea here is to create a tagging system where we can add and remove tags from a centralized ledger held on the pawn through an interface, so that our actions can interact with each other in ways that we can plan and know ahead of time, and we have a lot of control over what actions override others, what actions cancel others or interrupt others, and how are those sort of edge cases all handled. All needs to be done through some sort of ledger system. And it'll make more sense as we get going. So the first thing I'm going to do is make my ETags. I'm just going to right click and make blueprint enumeration. I'm going to call this Etag. And I'm going to make my first tag, which is attack active. Okay, so now that we've created our ETags, we're going to create an ETag interface for them to communicate with one another. for objects that have tags, be able to communicate with objects that need to know if they have tags. This is Etag Interface. In this interface, we need to have okay, so we have get all of our ETags, has ETag, has any ETag, has all ETag, give ETag, remove ETag, give ETags, and remove ETags. So each one of these functions just says I want to add and remove tags pretty much as I see fit. So in this side scroll character, we're going to go ahead and make sure we have this interface. ETag. So then we're going to implement all of these events. So we need a set of tags, which is actually going to be not an array but a set. So we use a set because it's a little bit cheaper. Okay, so that implements all of our ETag functions we could ever want. So now in our action object, we're going to create an array of activation tags. So these are going to be ETags that are added to the player. So we're going to our owner actor. I'm going to say has any ETags. So if you have any of our activation tags, then we want to not activate, right? If we have any of our activation tags, we're not going to activate, right? And then in activate action, I'm going to say give ETags, give our activation tags during activation. Then on end action, we're going to remove all of our activation tags. Now, this affords a little bit of an issue. Something to think about is that you want to make sure that you are adding, removing, and using ETags regardless of location in the set or in the array. In general, like that's part of the reason why we use a set is that we want to remember order is completely irrelevant, order doesn't matter. Is when we do multiple actions. Let's say we have an uninterruptible attack and we start swinging at somebody, and then as soon as we stop doing that ability, we remove our uninterruptible tag, but then we immediately go to a repost action or something else that could have interrupted it, and then we add on that activation tag, and let's say that one also is not interruptible, then we'll want to remove one copy of the ETag in these that's in the activation array from each of the actions. So when you stop doing your unblockable attack and you start doing your unblockable dash, your unblockable attack removes your unblockable tag without removing the one for the dash. You still have an unblockable attack tag. That's, this starts to get a little bit confusing. Okay, for our melee base, we're going to give an activation tag attack active. Alright. Go ahead and save all, hit play. So now we can't activate the attack until it's done. You'll notice that we can continue to move even though we're attacking, which probably isn't the best thing. So something else we can do is these E-tags now exist on the character. So in our movement input, so let me say, let's say attack active is going to be a generic for every attack or something like that. And we're just going to put a branch in here and say, if we're not in the middle of doing an attack, we can do movement. Right, now, this isn't exactly how I've done it before, because you'd also need to do this for jumping, right? That's one way to do it. But rather than doing attack active, we're gonna need essentially the same thing anyway, so just put it in here. But rather than checking for attack active, let's actually look for, let's make another tag. And that is movement blocked. So now we have a new tag in our enumeration, and we don't have to adjust anything in our existing action objects. We don't have to adjust our character class. We don't have to do anything. We just added a new enumeration in this list, and it now exists as a new tag that we can check for. That's how dynamic this system is. So now we're going to look for movement blocked. And we're going to say, if we don't have the tag movement blocked, we're going to add movement input. Alright, and we're going to say that our melee base object here also has the movement block tag. So now we're blocking firing the attack, and we're blocking firing our movement as long as we're attacking. Now, you'll also notice that you can start attacking from in the air. We can do an additional check in our melee base for like if we're in the air if you wanted. You could also have a tag go on and off as you detect the ground or not on the ground. You can bind to overlapping the ground in the character movement component. There's about 50 million different ways that you could detect whether you're in the air, and it really depends. Do you want to fire a different attack? Do you want to have an entirely different ability that does things? Do you not want to do anything at all? You know, depending on what you want to do for your specific use case, you're going to build something very uniquely different. So I did make an oops in here. So my activation tags, this is actually saying that the movement block tag is also going to block the is going to block the activation. So we actually want to make another array, and this is activation blocked tags. And then this is what we want to check in can activate action. So our activation tags are our tags that we want to put on during activation. We activate our action, we give ourselves ETags, we end the action, and we remove those ETags, right? This way, during activation, we can have other stuff, other contingencies, like say don't hit react, or block movement is what we're using this for, right? So in melee base, our activation tags include attack active and movement blocked. Now, activation blocked tags I can include attack active, or I could not include attack active. This means that my ability is going to continue to fire like it did before, right? But while it's firing, I still can't move. So now I've created a dynamic system where I can select what I block and what I don't during the activation of actions. And that's going to be it for the core of this action object tutorial series. It's kind of everything you need to understand action objects and sort of what they're used for. The next video is going to be going over combos, where I get into a little more of like how to handle some like strange sort of behaviors and sort of wrap your head around how this pattern works. So it's something that I felt was kind of important to include. I'll also include like more on interrupting and more on additional parts of handling edge cases in this system. So I will see you in that video.